Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to be your keynote speaker today. Actually, when we were first approached to do this and they asked me if I would come and do a speech for PTUK, I thought, oh yeah, it's just going to be a little bit of a talk. And then they said, oh, now that you've agreed, it's actually going to be the keynote speech. So no pressure, try to do a good job. So thank you so much for having me. As Monica said, today we're going to be talking about something that can be a sensitive topic. So if anyone does need to take a bit of a moment and leave the room, that's absolutely fine. But with grief and bereavement, it's something that everybody knows about and nobody really wants to talk about. And I think a big part of that is we don't always know how to talk about grief and death and dying. So hopefully today you'll learn as much from me as I can learn from all of you. Because initially I was trained as a person-centered counsellor, and then I decided that I wanted to really focus on my passion, which was bereavement work. And at Child Bereavement UK, it's not counselling that we offer, it's actually specialist bereavement support. So our support workers come from all different types of backgrounds. Some of us are counsellors, some of us come from a health and social background, social workers, educators, anyone who has the knowledge behind them to support grieving families. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what we do at Child Bereavement UK, there are two sides to our family work. There is our child-centred work, so where we work with up to 25-year-olds who have been bereaved of anybody significant in their lives. And then we have the adult side where we work with parents and carers who have been bereaved of a child of any age. So we can support somebody in their 60s who's been bereaved of a child in their 40s. And the other element of our work is we also do pre-bereavement work as well. So when somebody's not expected to live. So that's the sort of family side of our work. And the other side of our work is training professionals, because you can never have too much training. But what we also find and what we know is that in the majority of cases, if a child or a young person, or an adult for that matter, has a good supportive network around them consisting of family, friends, co-workers, anybody else that they interact with day to day, they don't need any further support than that when they are facing a bereavement. So through the training that we offer, what we're trying to do is boost people's knowledge, but also empower them a little bit to think, actually, no, I can be here to support this person. Because if that base support network can get in early, they won't need the support from organisations such as ourselves. So we're going to start off just with a little bit of a definition of grief. And the first one that I always like to mention is that it's a natural, normal response to loss. And by loss, we're talking about having less or none of something that you had before. Now, initially when families call into our helpline, and it can sometimes be very early days after a bereavement, and they say, my child is struggling, I don't know what to do. And actually, so much of what you see in the early stages of grief is completely natural and normal. So an enormous part of our work, when somebody does say that they're struggling after a bereavement, is just reassuring them that all of these weird and wonderful complex emotions, sometimes emotions that seem to defy logic or seem really contradictory, are actually perfectly normal. Even though it can feel confusing and stressful, it's perfectly normal. It's a very unique journey. We quite often say that there are as many ways to grieve as there are people in the world, because everybody does grief differently. Everybody also has very strong opinions on how you should do grief, but everyone does it in their own way. And we'll go into some of the reasons why that is later on. But because everybody grieves in their own unique way, it can also feel like a very lonely experience. So you might look at other people grieving in their way and think, why am I doing it differently? Is there something wrong with me? Am I doing it wrong? That's something we hear quite a lot is, I don't think I'm doing grief properly. Who is? And finally, that absolute mass of really complex, complicated emotions that you get. Emotions such as guilt and fear and relief, all these sorts of feelings where you think, should I actually be feeling that way? So a huge part of what we do and what you can do with the families that you support is just reassuring them that all of these feelings are completely natural and completely acceptable. So just to name a few emotions, I won't go through all of them because we are a bit strapped for time, but like I say, these are some of the words that the majority of our families bring to sessions with us, all of these completely confusing and baffling emotions and questions. So thinking about what makes grief such a unique experience, this is one of the really lovely models that I think captures it so perfectly. So right at the top, we have the relationship with the person who died. And this isn't to say that the better a relationship you have with the person who died, the more difficult you might find grieving. It's more a case of each unique relationship will have an effect on you in different ways. So it could be that the person who died is someone you were incredibly close to, and that's why you might be struggling. It could be that you had a terrible relationship with the person who died, and part of your struggles now are around, I'm not going to have a chance to mend that relationship, or I'm not going to be able to get some of the answers to my questions around why that was such a difficult thing. The next one we have is the individual, their personality, their background. From speaking to quite a few of you here today already, I think we've acknowledged that in the UK, we're really not good at talking about death and dying and sort of approaching it and having open conversations about it. And how you're brought up, how your family talks about difficult emotional issues, or I know just how you express yourself in general will also have a massive effect on how you express and process your feelings of grief. Also, things like religion and cultural things come into it as well, and the importance of processes such as funerals or going to a wake, or how you celebrate significant dates moving forward will all have a massive impact on grief. We then have the environment, and this isn't just talking about the supportive environment you have around you. It's also very much thinking about the physical, practical environment. So, for example, if you're going through grief, but you also have huge financial pressures going on, if you were one of two parents and now suddenly you're going to be a single parent, you're having to cope with all of that additional responsibility. For a young child, it might be, oh no, who's going to take care of my needs now? So many things about that environment. If we think about the poor teenagers who suddenly have to go through all of their exams at the same time as losing someone important to them, all of these little environmental factors will have a massive impact on how you can grieve, or whether you feel you can grieve at all. And then finally, the circumstances of the death. And again, this isn't necessarily saying that one circumstance is harder than another. It's more that each unique circumstance might have an impact on how you're grieving, depending on what's happened. So, for example, it could be a very sudden, unexpected bereavement, and that brings its own complications. Equally, you might have a bereavement where it's been very expected and you've been in that place for a long time knowing that it's going to happen, but it still comes as an enormous shock and it still brings its own difficulties. So when you are working with individuals where they do wonder why they might be grieving differently to other people, or why they're experiencing things in their own way, this is such a good way of saying, okay, let's have a look at some of these different factors and what makes your grief unique to you. So we're now going to have a little bit of a look at the models of grief. I know whenever we talk about theory, everyone goes, ugh, but I'll try and make it quick and interesting. So the first one is William Worden's tasks of mourning. Now, he chose the word tasks, I believe, because the word task indicates that it's something you have to do that you don't necessarily want to do, but also it's something where you have to put a little bit of work in. You can't just sit back and let it happen. So the first task that we have, and another thing to point out before I carry on, is these aren't in any particular order. And I think the first one is a great demonstration of that, because the top one is probably the one that takes the longest. And the first one is accepting the reality of what's happened. So many times you hear people being in a state of disbelief or saying, I just keep expecting them to walk through the door. And this is all around that acceptance of this has really happened and that actual belief in it. So like I say, this is sometimes the one that can take the longest. It can sometimes take well into the second year of grief before that reality starts to sink in permanently. And quite often people will dip in and out of this as well. So they might have some days where it feels very, very real, other days where you feel like you're back in that state of disbelief. We then have processing the pain of grief, and this is where some of those rituals that we have around grief are so, so important. Things like going to the funeral and marking significant events. All of it comes into being able to, well, like it says on the front of our pamphlets, make meaning out of what has happened and be able to have those opportunities to process some of those difficult thoughts and feelings. And this is also where the importance of those open and honest conversations come in as well. The next one is adjusting to a world without the person who died. And again, this isn't just the emotional and mental adjustments, it's also very much the practical adjustments. Like I was saying before about the environment, it's who's going to pay some of the bills now, who's going to take me to football, who's going to pack my lunch, who's going to take me to school every morning. All of these tiny little things that maybe as an adult looking in from the outside, you think, oh, that's not something to worry about too much. But particularly for children and young people, consistency and keeping a sense of normality is so, so important. So those adjustments to the world, it's so important that they feel they're supported in that. And then the final one of the most important ones, is finding an enduring connection with the person who died whilst you are now embarking on a life without that person in it. And another word for this is continuing bonds. And when we talk about continuing bonds, sometimes people get this idea that they have to choose one significant thing, one enduring connection, one continuing bond. And they put so much pressure on it, they think, ooh, what if I choose one that's not that great? What if I don't have a continuing bond that's really, really strong for me? And I think one thing people don't always realize about continuing bonds and enduring connections is that we have thousands of them with the person who died. It could be a life lesson that they taught you. It could be a t-shirt that you have of theirs. It could be something funny they used to tell you. It could just be a significant memory that you have with that person. And all of these tiny, tiny little things all join up together to make this enduring, continuing bond that people can turn to on significant days. Like quite often when we work with children and young people where they worry about my parents not going to be there for my wedding day or graduation, whatever it might be. Continuing bonds and enduring connections is such an important part of that because it's things that they can turn to when they miss that person the most. And that's what I've just talked about. The next one we're talking about is the dual process model. And this is one of the most popular models that we use with our families. It perfectly encaptures what they're thinking about whenever we talk about finding a bit of balance in your life. So we have everyday life, that nice big red circle, but then we have two things within it. We have the loss side and the restoration side. In the loss side, you might see people doing the grief work, so spending time with their thoughts and feelings of loss, spending time thinking about memories, looking back over old pictures and things like that. You might also get intrusion of grief, which is what people talk about when they say thoughts and feelings just popped into their head unexpectedly. There was nothing that particularly triggered it. It just almost came on them unexpectedly. And also you might find a denial or avoidance of things that seek to take you out of that place of grief. So it could be, I know a friend is trying to cheer up their grieving friend and they say, no, just leave me alone. I don't want to be cheered up right now. You then have the restoration side, and in here you can find distractions from grief. And I think distractions get a bit of a bad rep sometimes. Again, it's all about finding balance. Distractions are a brilliant thing sometimes when you need to take yourself out of something for a while. But also overly distracting yourself can also lead to complications. So we have distractions. We also have a denial or an avoidance of grief. So just wanting to pretend like nothing's happened, nothing's changed. I'm just going to pretend like that person's on holiday or that they're back at their house and I can just see them at the weekend if I need to. But then you also have in the restoration side, everyday life continuing. You have new experiences, new roles and relationships. It might be a new goal that you want to set for yourself, something that keeps you moving, essentially. Now, quite often when we show this model to families, they mistakenly think that there's a good side and a bad side. There's a side that you want to be in and a side that you don't want to be in. And actually, the most important part of this model is that zigzag line in between, because what that represents is an oscillation between the two, being able to bounce in and out of your grief, spending some time with your grief, some time being able to carry on doing other everyday things. And when we talk about balance with families, this is exactly what we're talking about. But also to mention, everybody's balance is unique and it will look different for them. Now, the kicker for us adults is that children are really, really good at this. Children are really good at this, and it's one of those things where, as adults, we wish we could be better at that. But the way that we explain this to children is by describing it as something called puddle jumping. I don't know if this video will work. If it doesn't, I'll talk you through it.
Young people can seem to move in and out of their grief very quickly, like they're jumping in and out of puddles. We call this puddle jumping. Imagine a puddle full of sad feelings. A child may jump into this puddle when someone important to them has died, but children can't cope with sad feelings for too long, so eventually they need to jump out and do something that distracts them, like playing with their friends or going to the park. As adults, we tend to stay sad for a longer time, a bit like being in a river of grief. We might mistakenly think that children aren't affected by a death because they seem able to jump out of the sad puddle quite easily. We might also try to protect children by encouraging them not to jump in the sad puddle or to come out before they're ready. This is understandable, but if we support children when they're grieving, they will come out more naturally in their own time. Puddle jumping is normal and means a child is learning to cope with their grief. If you need guidance on supporting a bereaved child, call our helpline on 0800 02 888 40 or live chat via our website.
So it's something that might already feel a bit familiar to some of you, and I think when we show this video to parents, they say, oh yeah, that perfectly explains why they might be inconsolable one moment and then 10 minutes later they're off playing with their friends again. So I think the most important part of that video is the idea of supporting people naturally to bounce in and out of their grief. It's when that process is made unnatural that you start to have complications. So things like over-distraction or so many work pressures going on that somebody just can't spend time with their grief. Anything that sort of forces them into one side or the other. What we want to do more than anything else is allow that bouncing between the two different sides to be as natural as possible and at that person's own pace as well. And that's a big thing that we're going to be talking about is sometimes not everyone is in a place where they're ready to do this work. They don't feel ready to talk about it and they don't feel ready to work through it. So the most important part of all of this is to be able to offer this support when that person is ready for it. The next model we're going to talk about is growing around grief. This is the one that most people seem to know about already, but I'll just whiz through it. So old models of this used to say that over time, you have everyday life, which is that sort of very faint red outline on the left-hand side. And in the early days of grief, it feels as though everyday life is consumed by grief. It's all you can think about. It's all you can feel. And then the old models used to say that over time, your grief will shrink and shrink and shrink until it pretty much disappears. We now know that's not the case. And instead, this model was updated so that it demonstrates not grief shrinking, but everyday life growing around grief. You have new experiences, you make new relationships, you have new goals. You keep moving forwards in life and your everyday life will grow around that grief. Now, this is a lovely model for when you're working with somebody who feels guilty for carrying on in everyday life, feels guilty for doing things that they enjoy or doing things that they care about. Because this model is so good at showing them that yes, your everyday life is growing around your grief, but your grief is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still a significant part of your life. You're not leaving that person behind. They are still playing such a significant role in your life. It's also great to be able to talk through how there will be some days where it might feel like your grief is floating around in the middle, not feeling quite as sharp and as harsh as it normally would. But there are also going to be days where it might feel like in that sort of bottom right one, like it's come really close to the surface. It could be a significant date. It could be that you've just got a lot of other things on your mind at the moment and it's making the grief feel particularly raw. So it's such a good model for talking about how grief can shift and change whilst you are carrying on with everyday life. And another thing you can talk about is how it can also sometimes feel like grief is growing again, getting smaller again, everyday life is growing again, getting smaller again. Everything is fluid. It's such a good thing to be able to demonstrate that. And the other thing that I just want to talk about briefly is meaning making. And what we talk about in meaning making is exploring how this experience has shaped you as an individual, how it has had an impact on your life, what maybe is now no longer present in your life, but also what you might have gained from this experience as well. So the meanings that the bereaved person gives to what has happened, the ways in which the person begins to make sense of their loss. So in the early days, you get a lot of why questions. Why this person? Why did this happen to me? I don't understand how this has come to pass. The role of cultural practices, a bit like we were talking about before, the meaning the person has of and gives to their own sense of self. So one of the things that you can quite often see after a bereavement is that it's shaken someone's sense of self because that person has played a significant role in their life. And without that person, what do they now do for themselves now that that person and the role that they played in their life isn't there? And also the meaning that the bereaved person can find in the future, like we discussed. So we're now going to have a quick look at working specifically with bereaved children and young people. So we're going to start off with children's understanding of death at different ages and stages. And it used to be that people thought that babies up to the age of 6 months just wouldn't be aware that a bereavement had taken place. It wouldn't have much of an impact on them. We know that's not the case now. So children up to the age of 6 months can be very aware of the withdrawal of someone who was every day present in their lives, so a parent or a significant caregiver. And this can very much present itself in terms of disturbed sleeping patterns, crying, problems with withdrawal. So this is an age where maintaining consistency is exceptionally important, trying to keep as much normality as possible now that that person isn't there. 6 months to 2 years is when children start to develop that idea of missing someone and wanting to be with someone. So after a bereavement, it really comes through in terms of separation anxiety and searching behaviour. So seeing children being very clingy with their caregivers, but also looking around for the person who's died and wondering where they are, asking lots of questions about, oh, when can I go and see this person again? 2 to 5 years is when children start to get interested in death, but their understanding of what that actually means isn't there yet. So at this age, children are really good parrots. They're very good at saying something back to you. So they can say, yes, I understand. Dad has died. I'm not going to see Dad anymore. It means he's not going to come back. When's he coming back from work? So they're very good at saying things back to you, but not fully understanding what that means. And very often when we work with parents, it's a case of saying to them, keep delivering these same messages, keep using the language of Dad has died, he's not going to come back, he's not going to be here anymore. They won't fully understand what that means, but it's important that they know what that doesn't mean. And we'll go into euphemisms a bit later. So at this age, you can see a lot of clinginess. You can also get some of those constant questions I was talking about. And it's just the importance of keep giving a consistent answer until that awareness and that understanding catches up with them. 5 to 8 years is where children start to get a fuller understanding of death and dying, what that means, the fact that it is something permanent. It's also where we get something called magical thinking, which sounds lovely, but sucks a bit for children, because magical thinking is talking about when the child believes that something they have done has caused this to happen. Because at this age, it's almost a bit like the child's at the centre of their own little universe, and everything that goes on around them is something connected to them. So when somebody dies, it's very, very normal for them to think that something they might have done, something they might have said, has caused this to happen. So this is why, particularly at this age, it's so important to give children open, honest, consistent answers and as much information as is okay for their age and as much information as they want to know as well, so that you can offer that reassurance and that information that nothing they have done has caused this to happen. 8 to 12 years is where they really start to get that understanding of permanence, but it's also an age where they start to very much think about their own mortality. And it's a terrifying thing to happen. And this is where I think a lot of parents sometimes start to worry that they start getting some of those deeper questions about, what if you die, Mum? Or what if I die? What's going to happen? What's that going to be like? And a huge part of our work with parents at that point is letting them know, firstly, it's okay if you don't have the answers, and it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know what happens when somebody dies, but I know that it makes me feel very scared. I know that it makes me feel very sad, and this is what I do when it comes up. So this is an age where you can start to see some preoccupation at school, perhaps a bit of social withdrawal. So this is an age as well where it's really, really great to have a good connection with the school. And one thing we quite often say to parents is to keep in contact with the school as much as possible about what would be helpful or unhelpful for your child. And then the poor teenagers, as if they didn't have enough going on already. You throw grief into the mix, it makes everything more complex. So 12 years plus. It's a time when you're not only trying to figure out who you are as a person and where you stand in the midst of everything else, you've also got an enormous amount of academic pressures and this feeling of, oh, you need to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life because you need to choose all of your subjects and everything like that. So, like I was saying before, when grief has an impact on your own sense of identity and who you are as a person, this is such a confusing and difficult time for teenagers, and so much of what they need in that moment is not only reassurance, but also additional work around self-esteem and themselves as an individual, who they are as a person. So I touched briefly on euphemisms, and this goes back to that idea of we don't like talking about death. So particularly for young children and children with additional needs as well, you get something called concrete thinking, which is where they take what you're saying very, very literally. And up until about 5 to 8 years old, it's so exceptionally important to use concrete language such as death, dying, or died, because even though the child might not know what those words mean, they know that it doesn't mean other things. It doesn't mean that someone is lost. It doesn't mean that someone went to sleep and didn't wake up again and then they're going to have massive fears about going to bed. It doesn't mean that they're somewhere in the sky and the next time they go in an aeroplane, they might see that person sitting on a cloud. It's so important to use that concrete language so that the child is able to even start processing what's happened, because otherwise it's going to leave them feeling really confused and thinking, well, if that person's lost, we need to go and find them. If that person's gone away, well, they're going to come back at some point, or why haven't they chosen to come back? So it's so important to use that real concrete language. So thinking about some of the things that you hear, I mean, this is just some of them, and you can see from reading some of those why it might be so confusing for children and young people. And also the other one to mention is things like heart attack and stroke can be quite confusing as well, because heart attack, they might know the word attack, but they don't know what a heart attack is. something like a stroke, they're very familiar with stroking a dog or stroking a cat, but in this context, it might be very confusing. So it's just about, before having some of these conversations with children, just being a bit more careful about the language we use, but also not shying away from using very concrete language and being okay with explaining what that means, whilst also acknowledging they might not fully understand it right now, but at least they know it doesn't mean one of these other confusing things. So what are some of the things that children and young people need? Right at the top, acknowledgement and understanding. So being able to acknowledge what has happened. And also in terms of understanding, when we use that word, we're not talking about saying things like, oh, I know how you feel, because everybody hates that. If there's one thing we always get told from teenagers, it's, I hate it when people say, I know how you feel. Everything is not about bringing your own understanding or sort of saying, oh yeah, I think I understand where you're coming from. It's about seeking to understand their unique experience. And can you tell me what would be most helpful for you? Can you tell me what you specifically are struggling with? And being able to then use that to tailor your practice to suit their individual needs and experiences. The next one is control. So another thing we so often hear from children and young people is that when someone dies, it feels as though all of their control is taken away from them. So not only has someone died and there's nothing they can do about it, you then have things like funeral arrangements that they're not involved in. Lots of decisions are made without them. Significant events, they might get told what they're doing, but they haven't been asked their own opinion. So for a lot of children and young people, what they tell us is that after a bereavement, it felt like they lost their voice, or that they didn't have a say in anything that actually meant quite a lot to them. So any opportunities that we can find to give children and young people some sense of control and some sense of involvement and inclusion in all of those different things is just sort of validating that relationship they had with the person who died and validating that feeling of, actually, this was significant for you and I'm going to acknowledge that by including you in this. The next one is space and time to grieve. Like I said before, about only sort of getting in there with support when they feel it's the right time for them. It could be that you go to someone and you say, oh, we have this support on offer, and the child says, no, I don't want that. And it's a case of saying, okay, just so you know, it's there when you do want it, but if you're not ready, that's absolutely fine. Someone to share their journey with. People differ on this sometimes. Some people love having people that they can share this journey with. They love being able to meet other bereaved children, young people that they can relate to and that understand their experience to a certain extent. Other people just like to be very private in their grief and they like to keep it as something just for them. That's absolutely fine as well. It's about giving people options and choices. Honesty, we've gone into that already. The importance of honesty in terms of reassuring children, not only that there's nothing that they've done that has caused this to happen, but also what we quite often find with children and young people is if they feel like information is being kept from them, or if they feel like they don't have the full picture of what's happened, their imagination will fill in the gaps, and it will usually fill in the gaps with something much, much worse. So that is why honesty is so important, because they could imagine 10,000 things, terrible, terrible things that could have happened. And actually, if they just had that piece of information, it would stop their mind racing with all of these possibilities and allow them to just start processing what has happened, not what might have happened. And then finally, permission to grieve. I think so many of the parents that we work with and the carers as well have that sense of, oh no, I can't show what's going on for me because I don't want to make my child upset. But a huge part of showing your own struggles to children and being human with children and young people is saying to them, it's okay to feel this stuff. It's okay to have days where you're not feeling great. It's okay to have times when you laugh and joke and play around as well. It's about not only acknowledging all of their thoughts and feelings, but it's also about saying all of that is okay. Whatever you're going through, that's absolutely fine. And I am here to facilitate that and help you with it. So the aim, more than anything else, addressing their concerns, reducing their anxiety, those fears, those fantasies, and those imagination gaps, Lightening the burden of secrecy as well. The more that we're open and honest with children, the less they feel like things might be being kept from them. If there's one thing we know better than anything else, it's that children and young people are exceptionally talented at finding out exactly what you don't want them to find out. So the more we can get ahead of that and give them that information before they find it out the wrong way from, I don't know, online, for example. We were working with a family just the other day where the boys found out their dad had died on social media. So it's about making sure that we have that openness and that honesty so that they don't feel like not only is this something I haven't been told about, but it's something that is okay to talk about as well. Reducing tension in the family goes hand in hand with that, and also being able to remember that you can still enjoy life and you can still enjoy the things that you like to do before the person died that you did before. It's absolutely fine to enjoy that, and so much of what you can do in your sessions, particularly with play therapy, is being able to validate that and say, look, it's still okay for us to play. It's still okay for us to enjoy these things and explore these things, even though somebody has died and something very sad has happened. We're now going to slightly touch on working with bereaved adults, and it was so lovely speaking to some of you before I started this to hear that adults are accessing play therapy as well, and that that's increasing because it's so beneficial. So with the adults that we work with, they're adults, parents and carers who have been bereaved of a child of any age. We also do some work with aunts, uncles, grandparents. And when we're talking about the death of a child or the death of a baby, quite often one of the significant struggles is, firstly, it feels like such an unnatural loss. This isn't something that should happen. This is not the way it should be. It's not the natural order of things. But also, the loss of a baby or child comes with so many secondary losses. So it's the loss of identity. So I am a parent. My baby has now died. What does that make me now? Am I still a parent? Am I not? Hopes and dreams, all of the ideas you had for that child and what you were going to do with them in the future. Loss of faith sometimes is such a powerful one. And particularly with loss of faith, faith is such an important part of some people's support network. And when something like this happens and it challenges your faith, that is an enormous secondary loss. Loss of an assumptive world, suddenly it feels like all the rules are broken, right? Everything I thought I knew about life has just gone out the window now. What do I do now? Loss of confidence and self-esteem, and also a loss of a support system and relationships. A lot of the time with the adults that we work with, they say that their bereavement has been so telling about who they can rely upon and who they cannot. The people that are there for them really shine through, but also there are so many people that they don't feel would be there to support them that just haven't shown up. So it can result in a big loss of support system as well. Loss of trust in self and the people in the world, particularly when we're thinking about bereaved mums who miscarry and things like that, and they feel like they're very much to blame or they can't rely on their own body anymore. Loss of feeling a part of normal life as well. So you see everybody around you with their children talking about their children. You see prams and things everywhere, and it just makes you feel outside of everything and like you're the strange one. You should have that, but you haven't got it. And then loss of a planned future, again, thinking about some of those hopes and dreams. As soon as you have your child, as soon as you're caring for a child, you have so many ideas about what's going to happen in the future with them, things that you're going to do with them, things they're going to do for themselves. Also, a big part of it for a lot of parents and carers is thinking about, oh, well, when I get older, my children are going to look after me. Suddenly, if you haven't got your child anymore, it's a case of, I'm going to be alone now. Who's going to take care of me as well? So a lot of bereaved parents tell us, and this is when thinking about what do parents and carers find helpful, ask my baby or child's name and use it is such an important one, and one that slips through the net quite often, because I think sometimes a lot of people don't always know that even when a pregnancy has been miscarried, terminated, a stillbirth, parents will still name their baby. So when you do come across someone who's had a miscarriage, stillbirth, termination, it's so important to say, oh, did you give your baby a name? What was your baby's name? And then being able to use that moving forwards as well. You get an enormous shift in perspective when a baby or child dies, actually when anybody dies. But this is something that particularly parents and carers tell us, is that when your child dies, it feels like everything else that you thought was important pales in comparison. You suddenly have a lot less patience than you did before for other people's stuff because it just doesn't feel important anymore. And also, life having less meaning sort of ties into that as well. There are so many things that you thought you might do with your life, so many things that you thought were going to be significant, that actually it doesn't feel meaningful anymore. We also have planning for the future. When you experience a bereavement, your ability to plan into the future suddenly gets very, very limited. So in the very early days, you can only think a few hours ahead, and then it might stretch to, okay, I can plan something to the end of this week and then the end of this month, and it sort of builds and builds as time goes on. But very much in those early days, your ability to think into the future and plan for the future becomes very, very narrow. The second year of grief is often when the reality sinks in. So one of the things a lot of people mention is that other people have this timeline in their head around grief. And for a lot of people, they think, oh, it's been 6 months now, shouldn't you be over it? Or some of the slightly more generous people might say, oh, it's been a year now, shouldn't you be over it? And I think what a lot of people don't always realise is that the second year of grief brings a whole whirlwind of other challenges, because that is when you've gone through the first of everything, but now you're having the seconds of everything. So it's your second Christmas without the person, it's your second birthday without that person. And it's that sense of, oh, hang on, this isn't going to change. This is something that's here to stay now. And that is what really brings that reality bomb and really takes people by surprise. They don't expect it. They think, I should be feeling better by now, shouldn't I? So this second year of grief really catches people by surprise. So if you're working with people in that place, it's sometimes so reassuring to say, don't worry, that is normal. It's not that you've taken this massive step back. It's just this second year of grief. Against all logic, I will probably feel guilty. With bereaved parents and carers, when their child has died, the core of your instinct as a parent or carer is to protect your child. If your child dies, whether or not you had anything, any involvement whatsoever, you're going to feel guilty and you're going to feel like you have somehow failed your child because they should be here and they should be burying you in several years' time. So it's so common when people mention feeling guilty for other people to say, you don't need to feel guilty, don't worry, you don't need to feel that. And actually, for a lot of parents and carers, what they really just want to hear is, okay, yeah, I completely understand why you might feel guilty, even though it doesn't feel logical, and even though there isn't anything that you did, I completely get why you might feel that way, and that's okay. And it's less about taking guilt away from people and more working on how you can support them when that guilt comes up for them. And also, it's not about moving on, it's learning to live with your grief. And this is where that growing around grief model really comes in. It's not about taking the grief away or making it shrink and disappear. It's about learning to live life alongside grief. I sometimes use this little analogy with people of when I was younger, right? It's such a pathetic injury, but I sat down on a chair slightly funny and it absolutely messed up my knee. And at the time it felt incredibly painful and it was horrible. But then over time I started to do physio and I did other things. I learned what set it off when it would get painful. I learned how to soothe it when it had flared up. And you learn these little techniques that you need to do when that pain suddenly feels sharp again. And it's exactly the same with grief. It will come in waves. There'll be moments where it really comes up and it's about thinking to yourself, okay, what have I got in my toolkit that I can use to support myself whilst this is going on? I know it's going to come up in future. Let's make sure I'm prepared for when it does. And this is another significant thing to remember, a bit like I was saying before with the loss of identity. Even though someone's baby or child has died, that individual is still in mind, body, and soul a parent. And this is a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, whatever. That is still your baby. It doesn't take away any of those instincts, those feelings, because when you become a parent, you're flooded with all of these instincts. And even though your baby isn't here anymore, those feelings definitely are. That person is still a parent, period. You'll be very happy to know that we now have a lovely coffee break. When you come back from coffee break, one of the things that we're going to be doing is having a look at some of the activities that we use with families. And one of the main things we're going to be talking about is that toolkit I just mentioned. So one of the things you'll have on your table is a lovely outline of a first aid kit. And in that first aid kit, we're going to be talking about what are some of the things that you can put into your emotional first aid kit that help you feel better. So whilst you're having a coffee, which is probably one of the things that I would put in my first aid kit, also have a think about what else you might put in there, and we'll have a look when we get back. I hope that you all got a nice chance to chat with each other over the coffee break and also had a bit of an opportunity to have a think about some of the things that you would put in your toolkit to help support you when you are having a difficult time. Now, one of the sheets that you will have is an empty first aid kit, and this is a really good way of introducing these themes to children by having that outline of a first aid kit, which is something, it's an image that they're quite familiar with. And they're very familiar with the idea that if you physically hurt yourself, you can go to a first aid kit and it's full of things that can help you. So this is our emotional first aid kit, really putting into that frame of mind of when it's my feelings that are hurt, when it's my emotions, my thoughts that are hurting, I have an emotional first aid kit that I can go to if there's anything that I need. And again, everybody's first aid kit is completely different. You have things like taking a long shower, going for a long walk, playing with my cats, using my time out card at school, going for a drive, having a hug, colouring in, polos. I quite like the polos one, that's a good one. But everybody's first aid kit is completely different. And this is one of the activities that I'm going to invite you to do here and now. It's entirely fine if you don't want to scribble all over your first aid kit. Feel free to flip it over and draw on the other side. But it's a lovely activity to do yourself to sort of get that feeling of, oh yes, I can see why this would be helpful for a family. So please now just take 5-10 minutes to have a bit of a scribble down on your first aid kit. Drawing pictures as well is a really lovely way of doing this. What are some of the things that you can put in your toolkit for when you're having a difficult time? The other thing to bear in mind whilst you're doing your first aid kit is that it's a really nice idea to have something in there for lots of different circumstances. Some things that you can use whilst you're at work, some things that you can use while you're on your own, some things you can use while you're with other people, so that there's something in your first aid kit that you can use at any time. You've always got options. And please also feel free to chat and discuss what you've got in your first aid kits. Normally there's always someone who says, oh yeah, should I put wine in there? Yes, I'm going to put wine in there. Okay, so if you finally add one more thing to your first aid kit, and then we will get down to talking about it. So, is anybody brave enough to volunteer something that they have put into their first aid kit? Music. Oh, music is a brilliant one. Music is an absolutely amazing thing to have in your first aid kit, because music is one of those things that helps you sit with a feeling. Music is something that doesn't always seek to take you out of a feeling. So a lot of people, I know, if they're feeling really angry about something, will listen to quite angsty music. If they're feeling sad about something, they'll listen to quite mellow music. So music's a brilliant way of helping support someone when they are in that difficult place, rather than trying to distract them or pull them out of it. So music's a brilliant one. Any other things in first aid kits? Swimming in the sea. Ooh, nice. I like that one. Any others? Gardening. Gardening's a brilliant one. And I think the lovely thing about gardening or anything creative is it's something that you can pour some of that nurturing energy into, particularly when we're working with bereaved parents and carers. Like I say, you still have all of those parental instincts. So when you're grieving, it can be lovely to find a hobby that is something quite nurturing or something that you can put a lot of that energy into, where you can grow or create something. It's a wonderful idea. So yes, brilliant, brilliant ideas. And the good thing about these first aid kits as well is it's something that you can add to. So it's something where you can add new things into it. You can always make a new first aid kit. It's something that can evolve. And like I say, having different things in there for different situations can be so, so helpful. So we have a few ideas. So things that can be helpful: people, family and friends, activities you can do, food and drink, and just anything that you can use for self-care. Because what we're trying to do with this first aid kit more than anything else is boost resilience and allow people to sort of recognize what is something that you can do for yourself in these moments to self-support, self-soothe. And it's such a good thing to do with children. They absolutely love making these first aid kits. And adults too as well. Adults like doing these as well. So we're now going to have a look at another sheet that you have all about me and my special person. So when somebody dies, if we think about those 4 factors we looked at a little while ago and that relationship with the person who died being right at the top, this is a lovely activity for not only exploring the relationship that you had with that person, but it's also an amazing worksheet for identifying some of those continuing bonds and some of those things that keep that person present in your life whilst embarking on life, carrying on. So you can see on those sheets, we have things like my first memory with that person, a few words to describe them, my favorite memory of them, I think of them when I do this, that, or the other, a special place for us, something they taught me, and my funniest memory of them. I really like the one where it talks about the funniest memory, because I think so often people, again, get that twinge of guilt when they tell a funny story about when the person who died did something stupid or did something something that you might want to tease them about. So just being able to say, it's okay to laugh about the things that they did. It's okay to say that they really annoyed you sometimes. So it's a lovely thing to be able to sort of promote and acknowledge. So like I say, more than anything else, this activity not only allows you to explore the relationship with the person who died, but again, with those continuing bonds and with those enduring connections, when people sort of say, oh, I don't know what my continuing bond would be with that person, I don't know what an enduring connection is that I actually have with them, if they can fill in this sheet, then they've already come up with 7 or 8 different things that can be demonstrated is, this is a continuing bond, this is an enduring connection, you have these memories, you have these things that that person taught you, you think of them whenever you do this, that, or the other. That is a connection that you have with that person. So this isn't one that I'm going to get you to do yourselves. This is one that you're more than welcome to take away and use in your practice, but it's also just giving you an idea of some of the questions that you can use to explore some of those bonds and those connections and relationships with the person who died. Now, this last one, this is one that we're going to have a bit of a try at and a bit of a look at. So this is something that we call a body map, and we leave it just as a plain outline of a person because there are so many different ways that people like to use the body map. And I'm going to go through a few different ones now. So the first one is being able to say how much of a feeling you have in your body. So the way that some people use the body map is they say, oh, about up to here of me feels like it's full of sad feelings. Only maybe a bit of that is guilty feelings, quite a bit of anger, and they sort of map it out that way. How much of me do I feel is made up of this particular emotion? And that's the demonstration of that picture on the side. The other way of using a body map, and the one that that I quite often use is using the body map to make that connection between physical feelings and emotions. So being able to say, okay, when you feel angry, whereabouts in your body do you feel that anger? Particularly with children and young people where they struggle to recognize when they're getting angry or when they're getting sad or anxious. Being able to link that in with a bodily sensation is so significant for improving their emotional intelligence. So you can write down, for example, in the head, I get lots of busy thoughts, or I get a bit of a headache. In the hands, you can write down, oh, I ball my fist when I start to get angry. A child I worked with the other day said, actually, my anger's mostly in my feet because I like to stamp and run away from things. And again, you can just start to explore, okay, not only are you getting these emotional feelings, where do you feel it in your body? How can you make that connection? It's almost going a little bit down the route of almost mindfulness, being able to sort of do that check-in with your body and improving some of those skills. Another way you can use the body map is, what do you notice in your body when you think of? So this is a really nice way of exploring how grief might be affecting you. So when you think about your special person who died, what are some of the things you notice in your body? Do you start to feel a bit hot in the face? Do you start to feel like you want to cry? Does your heart start going quite fast? Again, starting to make that connection between emotion and body. And then when I am, I. So this is sort of thinking about things like, quite similarly to where in your body do you feel, but this is more thinking about actions and how you play out emotions. So when I'm sad, I do this. When I'm angry, I do that. When I'm anxious, I do this. So you can see there are so many different versatile ways you can use the body map. And again, this is something that I want you to try out yourselves just so that you can have a bit of a think about the different ways that you can use it, but also the way that feels most natural for you. So it's something that you can complete whilst thinking about yourself, and you can fill out your body map to do with yourself, or you can fill it out thinking about a client of yours that comes to mind. So again, I'm going to give you 5-10 minutes just to have a bit of an explore of the body map and use it in a few different ways and see which ones feel significant for you. And then we'll have a bit of discussion afterwards about some of the things you noticed about it. Okay, excellent. I saw so much colouring, it was brilliant to watch. So, out of these different options, is there one that you felt was most right for you, or one that you found particularly helpful? Oh, none in particular. Did anyone think of a different way that you could use the body map? Oh, you use buttons. Okay, so you have a map of the body and then you have different buttons that represent the different feelings, and you can use the buttons to move them around. So there are so many different ways that you can use the body map, but I think the best way that you can use the body map is to help children start to understand and recognize, actually adults as well, how much of a physical part emotions can play on the body. It's also a very good way of exploring sort of stress-related illnesses, but also the physical responses to grief as well. Some of you might be familiar with the whirlpool of grief story, and if you haven't heard of it, it's something worth looking up after today. And one of the things that it talks about in the whirlpool of grief is the physical symptoms that come with grief, and that's another lovely thing that you can explore through this. So, There are so many creative things I could talk about. One of the training courses that we offer at Child Bereavement UK is creative ways of working with grief, loss and bereavement. So if you're interested in finding out a few more creative things that you can do, pop onto our website or go and speak to Maria, who's going to be out in the foyer today, and she will be able to tell you about all of our training courses, but also our creative ways of working. There are so many different ones. I've spoken with some of you already today about the memory jar. So this bottom left-hand one where you can use different coloured sand, or you can use chalk to colour in salt to make different colours that then represent a significant memory. And that's then something that is a physical representation of the memories and the connections that you have with that person that a child or young person can take with them. I also very, very much use the memory jar for adults as well, because quite a few people will come to us and they'll say, it's too painful for me to look at photos and videos. So what we do instead is we make something like the memory jar so that it's something they can turn to when they want to connect with those memories, but it's not as in your face as things like videos and photos. It's something that feels a bit more comfortable. And also because of the weight of it, it's something quite nice to hold or have on your chest. We also have things like memory paper chains, which is a lovely idea for something you can do around celebrations. So if you're working with children, young people, when they want to think about how to represent their special person at a celebration, making a memory paper chain is a really, really lovely idea. And you just write down one memory on each link of the paper chain, and it's something that you can bring out at any different celebration that you could possibly want, birthdays or sort of special calendar events as well. We then also have things like the Who's There For You tree. So this is something that we do quite often at our groups for families. And it's a nice big picture of a tree, and you stick leaves on with the names of the different people who are there for you. And it's a really nice way, particularly when someone is feeling very lonely or they don't know who to turn to. It's a lovely way of having those people in one place. And then also the comic book strip at the bottom. So particularly if someone is struggling to make sense of what has happened, or it was a traumatic circumstance that they might have witnessed, having something like a comic book strip is a really lovely way of being able to help them process, okay, what happened when? How did you feel at this point? What was something else that you saw? What was something that was particularly challenging? Quite a lot of the time when older children are trying to remember back to a memory when they were younger, this is a really nice way of helping them explore and process that timeline as well. So the comic book strip is a very versatile one as well. Oh, and this is another Who's There For You activity, which is so easy to do just with a pen and paper. You can just draw around your hand and put down 5 people on each of the fingers of somebody who's there to support you. And then you can also put down in the palm either some of the things that they do to support you, other people or places that support you, wider places like school or all of my friends, but you've got those 5 particular people you can turn to if you need to. Now, these are some of the workbooks that, some of them are available to purchase on our website, but some of them are also just workbooks and resources that we use quite often with the families that we see. I think the brilliant thing about workbooks is it's not only something that you can do in sessions with children and young people, it's something that they can take away and do with their parents and carers. Because a lot of the work that we do at Child Bereavement UK, we see people once a month. We don't see them once a week. And the main reason for that is because so much of the important work is done outside of sessions, in between those sessions, ideally with parents and carers. So workbooks are a great way of doing that. And then finally, just to finish off, you'll be glad to hear, we're nearly at lunch. Finally, just to round off, on our website, we have an absolute wealth of resources. It can seem a bit of an overwhelming mass, but we've done a lot of work to make it as user-friendly as possible. But on our website, we have things like the resources that you can purchase, but we also have information sheets and web pages on language that you can use specifically. We have it broken down into when someone's not expected to live, supporting children and young people, sudden death, including suicide and homicide. There's so much information on there and lots of example language that you can give to parents and carers as well. And we also have an entire section for schools. So if you're working with someone where school aren't being brilliantly supportive, you're more than welcome to direct them to that section of our website. But the other thing that I will mention, if there's anything that you can't find on our website or you want to be directed to it sooner, please, please, please feel free to give our helpline a call. They're open Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, and they are exceptional. Anytime you come across a situation where you think, I just don't know what to do here, they seem to sort of slip through all my gaps in my knowledge or knowing what to do in this situation, give the helpline a call. They're absolutely amazing, and they'll be able to direct you to anything or send you any resources that they think might be helpful or signpost you on to someone who might be able to help. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure.